So, hi everyone, I'm here with Dan Pearce today, and Dan, you're the business development director for Telsolutions in the sort of like the contact center space, but particularly focusing on local authorities as a local government, I would say recently. So Dan, thanks very much for joining me. Really appreciate it. And I suppose, given your perspective, and I know you've got wide coverage of local government, what do you sort of see as being like the unique characteristics of particularly contacting residents in a local government kind of space? I mean, what are some of the challenges that your customers kind of come up against?
Well, I think the biggest change, there's a few changes they're facing at present, but the biggest change is the increase in the cost of postage.
Mm.
And that's affected authorities for the last couple of years, where you've seen a significant increase in the sort of cost of services, but also the deterioration in the efficiency and performance of postage. So I think Ofcom recently on one of their reports put out that only sort of something like 77% of first class mail actually arrives on time, and that actually you will notice that most second class postage, which is predominantly used by local government, some of that's taking up to 10 to 12 days to deliver to the customer. So in the areas where we function, that causes a problem, because if you've got a demand for payment or a 7-day notice, often the customers are now not receiving that for at least 2 weeks, which makes the letters invalidated, and that's actually creating a problem for local authorities. And the second thing is they're recognizing that local government are recognizing that communications have changed. People aren't really reading letters anymore. It's expensive, it's slow, there's not a lot they can do about it. But they've been caught on the hop. They don't have everybody's telephone number or email address. You don't get that when you move house or move into an area. You don't give those details to the council. They'd only hold the details if you've called them for a specific purpose. So they're kind of trapped in a sort of postal and budgetary conundrum that they're finding it difficult to get out of.
I mean, we were chatting just before, and I know you've been in the industry a long time, and you just think about how communication methods have changed even over
Yeah,
like the last 10 years. And I suppose it feels like the local government, for investment or whatever reason, hasn't kept up with where other
correct.
industries maybe have sort of caught up. I mean, is that how you kind of see it? I mean, because it's changed dramatically, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. I mean, some officers may argue slightly differently, but what we see is there was sometimes an attitude of if it ain't broke, don't fix it or don't change it. So postal was just seen, well, we've always done it that way, so we've got to carry on doing it that way. But many authorities were looking at basic text messaging, but even that's seen a decline in its performance and capability, meaning that authorities are really stuck with 2 legacy bits of software, and that comes into the tools they were using. There's only a few providers for case management software within local government, and those handful of suppliers have developed those technologies for case management over the years that really just send letters, or you can buy a module to send a basic text message. They weren't really following, or the technology companies weren't necessarily developing and enhancing their products to keep pace with the way that the private sector was evolving.
And I suppose when you look at, because I know you sort of like bridge sectors, when you look at consumers, do you think has there been a change of mindset where consumers now kind of expect this stuff? I mean, they're expecting,
Correct.
I don't know, I'm looking at myself, right? You kind of expect, I mean, I love to have an app, or even if it's like a web page enabled as an app, like something where you can sort of do things just to get information, and sort of this omni-channel sort of
Right.
calls if I need to versus not, bit of chat. I mean,
So,
is that where's the gap?
So that's right, Chris. So what we've seen is certainly since 2020, in fact, it was started to hit him a little bit beforehand, is that where social media messaging or instant messaging has sort of risen and overtaken those sort of traditional, and that was driven by our own demands for that instant gratification, that instant answer. And whilst you have that experience in the private sector and you have that experience in your own lives, you then look at the model or the communications coming from local authority and local government. It's nothing like that experience. It's read up, find it yourself on the website, receive the piece of paper from us, and they're telling you a story, use the website to respond. So it is quite the net effect of that is that customers, when they receive that reminder, that communication from the local authority, that invariably they're deferring it, sitting on it, because it's not the same slick answer. It means I've got to step out in my time when I want to be doing other things and deal with that piece of paper that I've been sent, and I've got to do something with it. So that the gap has been widening as the private sector, particularly during COVID, was looking for efficiencies and savings. The public sector was still wanting efficiencies and savings, but were really not necessarily achieving and doing that. But we have seen local government change significantly in the last couple of years.
So that sounds like that's like the whole concept around. I mean, I'd call it like almost like friction, right? So it's like if you put too many barriers to, you make it too complicated to get the answer, then people's attention span these days, we just we're so used, we can't be bothered, right? And so it's just easy to not be bothered, and so you just do whatever's easier, and so you're in that competition almost like for how do you make it as easy as possible to get them to do something, right?
That's right. So if the customer has to, for example, just so I knew I had this in the drawer. If your local authority will write to you, their paper standard communication tells you how much you've got to pay on one side and how to pay on the back. But you've got to transition from this piece of paper to a keyboard to a phone, and that's putting in those friction and barriers which are preventing the customer to just doing a instant move on. Let's complete the transaction, let's deal with the matter and moving on.
And I suppose I know you deal with lots of different authorities and councils across the country. I mean, it's also, there's quite a lot of people. I mean, because it's every single resident, right, in a particular area. But it's also quite fragmented because they all kind of do things differently, albeit on shared services or those kind of things.
Yeah.
How much challenge is that in terms of, how much of a challenge do you have in terms of like overlaying this new technology in? Is it different in every single time with every single one, or is there some commonality there?
There is some commonality. However, within a local authority, different departments act very differently, and the data is still very siloed. And that's historically that certain departments run like their own fiefdom. So, for example, parking sits very separately from, say, revenues and benefits. And even revenues and benefits won't necessarily share data amongst each other. But there are authorities, and I can think of one, which is the London Borough of Southwark, who really went against that and pushed ahead with that single view of debt, which the private sector was doing. But that single view of debt means they were able to take data from different areas, pool it together and reach much better outcomes. That's rare, extremely rare in local governments. That's part of the challenge, that the advantage you had is you get it with, once you start building that sort of knowledge and experience with one authority, they tend to trust, those suppliers. But once you're in an authority, there is a bit of challenges that each department runs different software, different systems, and they don't necessarily talk to each other because it's not commercially beneficial for them to do so, unless you can present an argument. But a private firm would see it commercially beneficial to write a piece of middleware so one system would talk to another.
Yeah, the thing I've always found interesting whenever I done work or talked about like local government kind of area is like looking at almost like into like total resident benefit as well, which is like is a little bit more missing, I suppose, in financial services. You look into sort of like bad debt and loss provisions, those sort of things, or customer satisfaction. But you do have this, if you don't address a particular issue, it might be symptomatic of something else that's happening in social services, as an example, and and that can be very expensive to fix if you wait versus getting ahead of things earlier. And getting ahead of some of these issues can make a big difference to residents' lives, really. And that's a very interesting kind of nuance that's very specific to the sector, it kind of feels like.
Yeah, so it is quite different in local government. They don't necessarily share and pool things, and sometimes that's because of bits of legislation or the way they've got restrictions about sharing data, because of the levels of privacy that there is there. But there are authorities doing that, and there are certain suppliers. I can think of one, which is NEC. They've got, I think, probably about, I'll probably get kicked for getting the number wrong, but maybe well over 150 local authorities or around that number. And as a result, what they've done is they've looked at the way they communicate and the tools they've got available, and they've partnered with suppliers like Telsolutions to actually sort of jump forward rather than trying to develop in the sort of enhancements themselves. They've gone out to the market a bit the best of breed to actually catch up a little bit, because it might sound easy just to go ditch the case management system you've got and replace it, but these things are massive and highly complex, not easily replicable, and there's nothing really on the shelf to do it. So it's kind of left to those sort of three top suppliers who have the market cut up between them.
Yeah, yeah. And I suppose if I was, I mean, I mean, when you go in and you actually look at do an assessment, or you sort of like see some of your clients or prospective clients as well, what do you think? What's your recommendation typically, and like a good place to kind of start? Because often these things are a bit of a journey sometimes, which is you just need to start in one particular place, then be able to demonstrate the improvement, then you can go to the next step and the next step.
That's it.
I mean, how do you sort of typically attack that? And then I suppose where do you look at first?
So what we found was that we approached it quite differently. We didn't go in via sort of the ICT approach, whereas we didn't approach ICT teams and say, we've got this amazing bit of technology for you. What we found was, as you said, Chris, we had to go in and approach it through one department, revenues and benefits, and through one particular application. And by doing so, that meant other teams could watch and observe and see what the cost benefits are. Once they could see the cost benefit and of course the performance, it then made it easier to sort of services to propagate out to other teams. But we found that was the best approach, rather than sort of walking in even to Rebs and Bens saying we can do everything, because the we can do everything involved too many stakeholders. It might be a slower process for us as a private firm, but more effective, that we could prove a point in one area, prove the business case, because they have to produce that, and then it made it easier later on to sort of propagate services out to different areas, different departments and teams.
I mean, the stakeholder piece is kind of interesting, because I mean, even in the private sector, in like the big banks, for example. I mean, we always talk about stakeholder management, but it's just like next level when you talk about public services in terms of like how do you do this and how everyone has a say.
That's right.
And those kind of things, which is, I mean, there's probably a lot of learnings for us in the private sector around how you've gone about to do that in terms of actually managing some of that, because it is in other areas as well, but maybe not to the same kind of extent.
Yeah, so definitely on that, in terms of the sort of stakeholders, some of the bigger meetings where we've brought in other departments have come in to have a look at what we're doing. When we've presented, it's not easy to sort of say, on the one hand, to you guys over in council tax, we'll make it rain with cash, because then you can say, well, you can use it over in benefits, and they're going to be thinking they're more sensitive. The customers have got different issues. They're not trying to achieve that. They've got different goals. So it does make it that you've got to position the technology for each department, which we made a lot of mistakes at the beginning because our proposition wasn't quite focused enough and positioned correctly for each department. But now we have a good understanding, plenty of experience. But one thing that did make a difference was to gather best practice from each department and share that with the next local authority, because that sharing of that best practice seems to have just made sure that they're not making mistakes as they go forward. No one's trying to start from a blank sheet of paper each time.
So that's local authorities learning from each other.
Correct.
And that's a good way of kind of sharing, which is you get in some other industries, so things like credit unions and those sort of things to a certain extent, water companies, I suppose, to a certain extent. But I suppose it might be a little bit different, maybe in some of the financial services where it's a little bit more competitive. I suppose.
Yeah, that's right.
And in terms of like contact channels, I mean, you talked about letters, you talked about, obviously I know you do calls as well. I mean, like I know that your event the other day we were talking about replacements for messaging, so things like RCS, those kind of things. I mean, where should we be starting to think about these are the next wave of channels to add into collections and contact processes?
Yeah, I think so. For us, text messaging is certainly on the decline. there was too many issues from 2020 onwards with scammers and fraudsters affecting every member of the public across Europe, not just in the UK, probably globally. And we were seeing we were seeing data and presentations from MEF, the Microeconomic Forum, Mobile Economic Forum, sorry, and we were seeing their sort of data on that. So we started pushing in RCS. So RCS really has come in because it's the trusted sender, verified sender, so people can be assured of what they're receiving is genuine. So that was the first thing. So we do see that as becoming the de facto delivery mechanism. So I think text messaging will remain, but it's going to remain for sort of your simple doctor or dentist reminder. But actually what we're finding is to create an efficiency, you need to have a load of reporting off the back end of this stuff. And you need something like RCS because you just don't get it with basic text messaging. The next wave I would say is it's got to be built in with WhatsApp and with virtual assistant hanging off the back of it. So WhatsApp, of course, being an opt-in service, you need kind of RCS to drop something on the customer's virtual doorstep, i.e. their mobile phone and their inbox. And then the customer will probably want to use, and what we're seeing signs of, they'll want to use WhatsApp to engage with you because it follows the sort of conversational life they have, conversational commerce, seen massive growth in the last 2 years. So we kind of see those two mechanisms, the RCS for the verified sender, proactive communications, and then the two-way messaging for the transaction part, using WhatsApp and probably strapped onto the back end of that a virtual assistant, Gen AI virtual assistant to do sort of manage that conversation.
I mean, one of the big frustrations you hear across the industry, particularly with in this kind of space, is around, the waiting. I suppose the Senate using a letter is almost like waiting, and then it goes out to the enforcement kind of process, and there's fees that are added on and those kind of things, and that very much is a consequence of the way the system kind of works to a large extent. But I know that, and even when you talk to managers in local government or even enforcement agents, often they'll say, look, we've got to be more proactive and sort of talk to people much earlier. And I know the government's been looking at that. There's been reviews.
Correct.
There's been looking at how fast do you think that's going to change, and what are the barriers to actually making that kind of change? Because systematically, the way the process is kind of structured, it makes it hard for funding and sort of justification. But we know it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. So there's some changes to council tax coming in next year, and that will affect the way that local authorities will have to communicate with people. They're going to have to move away from the usual sort of 10 months a year charging, then 2-month break. They're going to have to, as a default, offer people to spread the payments over 12 months to lower the bill slightly. But then they're also going to need to adjust the way they do the communications. They're going to have to be far more proactive when someone falls into arrear, because at the moment what happens is if you miss a payment, they send you the entire bill for the year, which is a little bit harsh, to say the least. So they've got to lower that, and to lower that, they're going to have to be far more proactive. And the way to do that is not via sending letters, which, as I said, people don't necessarily treat as a priority communication anymore, but they're going to need to use digital to get under someone's nose and speak to them directly.
I mean, very much brings it in line with what you see elsewhere in the industry in terms of, I mean, it's almost like you're on like a payment arrangement for 10 or 12 months, 10 months, and then the whole amount becomes due and you sort of default. Now it's sort of like, whereas the rest of it is kind of like you're paying monthly, aren't you?
That's right.
And so what's owed is your monthly amount.
Correct. Yeah. So they're going to have to go down that road. I mean, it looked like something similar was going to happen a few years ago, when they were bringing in a capability called breathing space. That didn't really happen, but this time it looks like it will do. We're completing a project in Wales for the Welsh government, and that affects all local authorities in Wales to do pretty much this, which is a more proactive way to directly contact residents, inform them, and try and keep them on track. And it's the way that really, if you look at the way the medical industry's gone, medical industry, we all have either things like timers on apps to tell you when you take your medication. You have timers to tell you when your appointment is, and it's all about treating their treatments, really nothing to do with medical treatments, but their treatments to keep someone on the straight and narrow to remind them to stop them falling into arrears. If you apply that same principle, which is what really the government want to do, and the Welsh government certainly want to do, you apply that same principle of regular reminders. One, the cost is a fraction of the cost of postage, and two, it's achievable, and a percentage of people will stay on track and will reduce their arrears.
I mean, there's a two schools of thought, I suppose, to a certain extent, which is one is if you miss a payment and you now owe the full balance and you've got the 10 months worth of outstandings, then if you pay that, then that accelerates, I suppose, cash flow, versus if it's broken out and you're only owing the small amount, then it's a smaller amount. However, on the other side of that is people are more likely to pay. I mean, on balance, I imagine it was done the former, because if we're going to get the larger amount now and get certainty around it, do you think it's going to have any cash flow implications for councils going to the new, or do you think it's going to be balanced out by the fact that, what if it's a smaller amount and it's a bit more reasonable, it's less likely to go to enforcement, it's less, and I'm more likely to be able to pay it, if anything, so it's lower court costs and everything.
Yeah, I think that the hope is that it will make it more affordable for people, but I think what you're noticing certainly this April, when everybody started paying their new council tax, is that the bills went up significantly around the country for most local authorities. I think we're probably a handful that didn't have to put up their bills by 5, or even some of them that are in such a financial predicament, they've put up their bills by sort of 10%, etc. I don't see that changing. If you look at the state of the roads outside, the potholes are everywhere, and they've not managed to fix that. As I think there's more rises, so you might make a short-term saving. The public might feel, oh, that's good, my payments have gone down because it's spread over 12 months. I think within a couple of years, you probably find we'll be back to where we are, but that's my opinion. That's not.
So it'll go down because it gets prorated over 12 rather than 10, but then it'll probably tick back up again.
I think it will catch up. There's a lot of work to do there. From my opinion was that after COVID, local authorities, of course, during that COVID period, central government seems to be putting a lot of money in supporting. Rightly so, they were putting support into people, but somewhere along the line that has to be paid for, and local government were helping residents, doing what they could, and they did a great job. I mean, you saw some terrific work, and there were some superb companies that developed software and solutions to helping residents identifying where the help went. But ultimately, after that period, what you found was, I think that the money tapped from central government turned off, and sort of what I felt was 2023 onwards, local authorities were suddenly finding there wasn't so much money coming from central government, who had their own issues to pay for COVID or whatever they were doing. So now local authorities there are more of them strapped for cash now than ever before.
Yeah, and it's making the case for investment to modernise some of the contact strategies more difficult for folks. I mean, kind of like it's and you talked a bit about sort of like having middleware or having these disparate systems in, I mean, lots of legacy systems essentially, as we would say. I mean, where do you think the role is of things like, we've got a new wave of kind of AI that's coming in that makes it easier to sort of interpret between different systems? I mean, where do you think the role of that is? Do you think that's a potential opportunity in the future, or is that sort of like in this particular sector like 5-10 years out? I mean, because you want to manually, if you're multi-screening, aren't you? And it's like, how do you get an agent to kind of basically build a resident picture of someone?
Yeah. So I think what I see happening out there is you see some changes. Central government talk about big AI initiatives and stuff, and I think that some of that stuff come trundling down the path when it comes. But on local government side, things are slightly different. In fact, I think a bit faster moving. It does depend on the authority to who picks up what, but there's a few things you see. So what I'm seeing is companies like Ascendant Solutions and DGI Digistaff. A lot of authorities are going to those and others and looking at RPA bots. If you can't change the core system, that legacy system, overlay it with an RPA bot, repetitive process automation, that'll do those tasks. I certainly see some huge growth in those tools. From my side, the contact center and Rebs and Bens need more help managing customers because of our habit changes, because of our behavior changes, that we don't want to read reams and reams of text on a website, customer will call the authority. The authorities don't have the resources to handle that volume. Therefore, they are taking services from firms like Telsolutions for virtual assistants. We no longer support chatbots, it's too old, but we support these Gen AI virtual assistants that are doing the brilliant job at picking up and processing. So you're seeing AI coming in, but because decisions are made by per authority, there's also a change, Chris, worth noting that for many of those smaller local authorities that don't necessarily have the budget, the resources, or the in-house technical skills to look at newer technologies, you've got LGR or local government reorganisation starting to take shape from 2027, 28, 29, etc. So we are going to see some of the smaller district councils disappear. As a result, those authorities, they're going to be merging together. They're not going to get tons more resources. In fact, it's designed to give a saving. So they're going to have to look at technology to create those efficiencies. So I would say from our side, more sort of tactical, we can get those tactical solutions here with RPA from those other firms. People like the GovTechs of the world are doing very, very big business there as well. And then there's our side doing the sort of customer engagement piece, the messaging, and then the handling of conversations in the contact center. We're seeing strong growth there.
I mean, it does feel like there's an opportunity, especially with the economies of scale, to put some of this technology in.
Yeah.
And it can lift the burden for a lot of the internal
Correct.
teams. So
Yeah.
you basically, I mean, I know operations very well, and you sort of feel like you're under pressure from volume, particularly when you have enough people. Yeah. But if the tech can take the pressure off, it allows you to do other things, right? And I'm not sure if it's even in this space, I'm not sure if it will save that much money as much as absorb the volume that they should be answering often in these cases. But again, if it helps residents, and it means you don't have that pressure point there, right?
Correct. Yeah.
I mean, the saving probably comes from avoided demand downstream with people calling back multiple times, or making complaints, or those kind of things, which is probably an indirect saving, but probably equally as important.
Yeah. I mean, people are pretty vicious if they don't get the service they expect. They'll post something on Facebook, etc. And local authorities aren't running contact centres like a commercial organisation. Some of those commercial organisations need to take a hard look at themselves if you've got problems with your broadband, as I did only the other day. But so we're finding that people's perception is local authorities should pick up the phone and deliver services quickly. They generally can't. They're not designed to do it that way. And that gap between what the private sector delivers and the public sector will widen and widen out there. But those tools are there. One thing I would like to add, though, is when you look at the conversations that when the public want to communicate with a local authority, something like 33% of them are just people looking for information, and some 40% of them, or no, 20-something percent, is they're looking for support. So it's about 60, around about the 60% mark. Both of those functions, support and information, generally don't need a human. So a human is in those very small contact centres in local authorities, trying to fight their way through high volume of calls, because most of the websites the local government have, the portals, they look pretty, but they're not interactive. And that goes back to our expectation is on our mobile device. We put in a question into the search engine, and it doesn't just come up with a bunch of links, it generates an answer. So our expectations have moved on, but what we notice is our experience of those local authorities is just not there.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, that's like 60-70% of your call volume could be redirected elsewhere, and then you got the same resource to then basically deal with the more complex social cases or collections cases or whatever it is, right? As well.
That's it.
So where do you think we'll be in the next 5 years? I mean, given all that we've talked about and the speed that these things are coming through, but also, I suppose, tempered somewhat by the sector. I mean, how fast do you think we're going to move? Where will we be in 5 years' time? What would be your view?
My view is in 5 years' time, the majority, for the bigger authorities, the majority of the customer interactions will move away from voice, and will move to either voice assistants or through a virtual assistant, and they'll be coming at the authorities either telephoning, but the experience will have to be good. I don't think it's quite there yet on the voice, although we've seen some pretty amazing technologies on that, and the rest of it will still be conversational, and that'll be coming via WhatsApp. And messaging will, I think postage is sort of in a bit of a death spiral, and there won't be no rescuing it. There is bits of legislation which mean that authorities still have a statutory requirement to send letters, and they can't get away from it. But that legislation that means it's statutory was written so long ago, back in the 90s, before this technology was in a twinkle of someone's eye. So the next 5 years will look quite different. Authorities aren't going to get, there's no pot of gold coming over for them to increase the resources. They've got more challenges and more support they've ever had to do for more areas. Adult social care is growing, the elderly numbers are growing. So they're going to have to make some hard decisions and invest in technology to help them manage the customers. And it will be looking like you'll either speak to them or chat to them, but the majority of those conversations will be fronted with AI.
I mean, and I think just from this conversation, the challenge is like, how do we get people to start taking those initial steps to really start to take forward and explore the technology, find out what it can do, so they get comfortable with it, rather than we're not going to do that here because it could help solve the challenge. It sounds like.
Yeah, if we look at one of the examples I used is the retailer Next. I had to change something at Christmas, and I was mesmerised at how good the experience was using their virtual assistant. Of course, people's perception at the moment is automatically they use the term chatbot, and there's probably tens of thousands of chatbots out there. But again, they're legacy. They were frustrating. Some of them were terrible. Some of them are quite good. But the point is, the technology now has matured, particularly with the latest iteration, the Gen AI stuff, that has to be built on trust. But for people to understand it, they've got to see it working practically, but they also should be shown practical reference sites like companies like Next, where you can see, okay, this is how it could work, this is how powerful it is, and try and move away. Well, they're selling jumpers and t-shirts, we're doing council tax. No, you're doing the same thing, it's just the product's different. I think people need to open up and have a look at this technology and try it. Most of this stuff is highly affordable, really easy to implement. And a note on that, Chris, is the way that we're seeing this technology going in, I think the way it's being designed is that the practitioners in each case can really implement these services. It's moved away from being the realm of ICT. ICT needs to develop it. ICT needs to purchase this. ICT will develop the service for you. No. What we're seeing is buy a service and the practitioners are able to actually develop it around their need because they understand what's wanted.
Yeah, I mean it's changing lightning fast.
Yeah.
And you say if it's more sort of like self-configurable or user configurable, then it makes a big difference, isn't it? And sort of
yes,
you can
right.
sort of like well, I mean it's exciting. Dan, thanks very much for joining me. I appreciate it.
No problem.
It's a fascinating space. I know it gets seen as being a bit sort of like very different from other industries or elsewhere, but actually, when you're talking about it, I mean, like, there's so much exciting stuff that actually is going to evolve. I mean, and to be part of that can be quite rewarding for people. I suppose it's just trying to get those initial steps and getting the approval to go ahead and do it. But if you can get into it, I mean, there's just a huge opportunity. It's pretty exciting.
That's right. It's great.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much. I really appreciate it.